Ladies and gentlemen, the luncheon is about to begin. I'd like to once again invite all our guests to please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Vice President Xiao Meiqing and His Excellency Rossel Dlamini, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Eswatini, and Madame Dlamini. Welcome to the luncheon of Ketagalan Forum 2026 Indo-Pacific Security Dialogue. Thank you so much to Vice President Xiao Meiqing for joining us today, this afternoon during our luncheon. Thank you so much. Please take a seat. Welcome. We'd like to once again express our warm welcome to all our guests here at the luncheon. Thank you for being here. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to the luncheon of Ketagalan Forum 2026 Indo-Pacific Security Dialogue. It is a great honor to have you all here with us this afternoon. Today, we're privileged to feature a distinguished guest for our luncheon keynote address, the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. And to open this luncheon session and to introduce our keynote speaker, it is now my distinct honor to invite our host, Her Excellency the Vice President Xiao Meiqing, to the stage to deliver opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Vice President Xiao Meiqing. Welcome.
Your Excellency, Rossel Dlamini, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Eswatini, and Madam Philippe Dlamini, the Honorable keynote speaker for today, the Honorable Chrystia Freeland of Canada. And also we have Your Excellency Sanna Marin, former Prime Minister of Finland, and Ambassador Wu, co-sponsor of today's luncheon, and also Grace Chung, Director of International Affairs for the Taiwan Institute of Economic Research. Distinguished friends, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, it's a great honor for me to have the podium for just a few minutes, and I guarantee it won't be long. Before we present today's luncheon's keynote speaker to all of you, but I want to highlight that your presence here means a lot to us. It is a shared commitment to Indo-Pacific peace. And your presence also bears witness to the solidarity of the global democratic community. Now, Taiwan's often described as a front line of geopolitical tension. And yet, the Taiwan that we know is not an isolated island left helpless against authoritarian waves. We are actually a proactive force for stability in this region. And this is also a robust land of freedom, growing ever more resilient despite and under pressure. Now this year, as President Lai shared with you this morning, marks an important milestone in Taiwan's journey towards democracy. 30 years ago, Taiwan held our first ever presidential election, and that was in the middle of all kinds of threats, including missile threats coming from across the strait. But the people of Taiwan have proved that democracy can take deep root and flourish on Asian soil. And even against relentless coercion, pressure, and isolation, Taiwan has thrived, not only as a model of open society, but also as a driving force for global prosperity and innovation. And yet we cannot ignore the severe threat that authoritarian expansion poses to the rules-based international order. And today, gray zone tactics, from cognitive warfare and psychological operations, threaten to weaken our societies. Taiwan refuses to be passive. Indeed, we've taken a proactive approach to deter and defend. History teaches us that security isn't achieved through weakness or subservience. Rather, peace is built upon strength, especially sustainable peace. And by bolstering our defenses and societal immunity, we raise the threshold of aggression and deter adversaries from testing our resolve. Driven by this conviction, President Lai Ching-te has reiterated his commitment to enhancing military defense readiness. Furthermore, we believe defense isn't only a military matter. So the President has also initiated the Whole of Society Defense Resilience Committee. From backup communications to critical infrastructure resilience and security, to also energy security and stockpiling, our goal is clear, and that is to safeguard the daily lives of our citizens. And simultaneously, we are also building deeper international partnerships to weave a robust defense line for Indo-Pacific stability. Now, in a changing world, economic security is also national security. And so today, Taiwan also builds global partnerships on a foundation of trust. Alongside like-minded democracies, we are leveraging trade and technology to forge secure, resilient, and trusted supply chains. This values-based approach ensures that our economic progress will not be held hostage by authoritarian coercion. A stronger Taiwan also means a more stable Indo-Pacific and a safer world. And yet, even as we deepen our democratic resilience, China continues to expand its authoritarian reach, and most recently through its so-called law on promoting ethnic unity and progress. This represents a troubling escalation that demands our serious attention. This law is not a localized issue. It's a direct challenge to universal values and the international legal order. Through vague provisions and selective enforcement, it seeks to export censorship and provide a legal pretext for transnational repression. For example, Article 6 prohibits acts that undermine ethnic unity and create ethnic division. The language is vague enough to criminalize a wide range of cultural, religious, or political expressions by minorities, since division is defined by the state. Article 63 extends the law's reach beyond China's borders, meaning anyone living outside China could also face legal consequences if Beijing determines that their actions undermine, quote unquote, ethnic unity or create ethnic division. This gives Beijing a legal tool to pursue activists, academics, or critics abroad. When authoritarianism extends beyond reach with impunity, there are no bystanders. Every individual and nation that treasures freedom must stand on the same front line. We call on democratic partners to align closely and build a united defense against expansionism and transnational repression. Now, to address all of these evolving challenges and threats, now more than ever, we need strategic vision and leadership, which our keynote speaker today exemplifies. The Honorable Chrystia Freeland, former Prime Minister of Canada, in addition to her contributions to Canadian foreign policy and finance, has also been recognized internationally as Foreign Policy's Diplomat of the Year in 2018 for strengthening transatlantic ties. Freedom House's Mark Palmer Prize in recognition of her work championing human rights, and most recently, the Foreign Policy Association Medal, the organization's highest honor for her defense of democracy and the rules-based international order. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, the Honorable Chrystia Freeland.
Thank you. Vice President Hsiao, I'd like to also invite you to please remain on the stage and please welcome the Honorable Chrystia Freeland to join us on the stage with Vice President Hsiao for a picture. Welcome. I'd like to invite both of you to please join us in front of the stage before we begin to take a picture. Wow. Okay, please face the camera in the front. Give us a smile. 1, 2, 3. We'd like to thank Vice President Hsiao for the wonderful remarks. Oh, a big heart. Okay, another one. Please face the camera with a big heart. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for the applause. Thank you. Once again, thank you very much, Vice President Hsiao. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Chrystia Freeland to deliver her keynote address. Welcome.
Okay. Ni hao. Ni hao wan. Vice President Hsiao Bi-khim, Prime Minister of Eswatini, my dear friend Sana Maran, honored guests, distinguished guests, friends of freedom and democracy from around the world. Ça me fait un tellement grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous, ici à Taïwan. Je sais que nous tous sommes les amis de la démocratie, de la liberté dans le monde. I'm Canadian, I have to say a couple of words in French. In the ancient Chinese philosophical classic, the I Ching, the Book of Changes, a text of more than 2,000 years, there's a line about how history turns. Many of you in this room will know it well. The incipient is the faint first stirring of movement, the earliest visible sign of what is coming. and the wise act the moment they see it. They do not wait out the day. As a journalist and then as a politician, I've often found myself in places where if you looked and listened closely, you could see and hear that faint first stirring, that earliest visible sign of what is coming. And maybe fix the microphone. I don't think they did that in the Yijing, but you could hear that faint first stirring, that earliest visible sign of what is coming. And the wise did act the moment they saw it. This afternoon, I want to talk to you about two moments in my life, two of those moments, and then about the moment we're living in now. When I was just 22 years old, right after graduating from Harvard University, I moved to Kyiv to work as a journalist. It was the spring of 1991. The Berlin Wall had fallen, but the Soviet Union still existed, and it was still run by the CPSU. It was one of those hinge moments of history, a time when an old order collapses and a new one takes its place. By the end of that year, the Soviet Union had collapsed. The CPSU had lost its monopoly on political power, and Ukraine was an independent country. It was a surprise for everyone but the Ukrainians. As late as August 1991, 35 years ago this week, an American president addressed the Verkhovna Rada, the parliament of the Ukrainian SSR, and lectured the Ukrainians on why they should stay in the Soviet Union. I was there, I remember hearing. That ill-judged admonition was dubbed the Chicken Kiev speech, because almost instantly, the world understood that it was out of step with the yearnings and convictions of regular Ukrainians. That year and that speech taught me one powerful lesson which shaped my life and my political thinking, and which I believe remains relevant 35 years later. What I learned was this: the human desire to be free is universal and incredibly powerful. I'm so lucky. I was born in Canada. That meant that freedom was my birthright and something I grew up taking for granted. In Soviet Ukraine, I lived in a country where people were not free, where they could be fired or beaten or arrested or imprisoned for the crime of criticizing their government. In those days, apologists for the Soviet system argued that Ukrainians didn't actually want to be free. A popular view at the time was that liberal democracy might be suitable for Western Europe and North America. But it wasn't a system that worked for Eastern Slavs with their different history and traditions. That view was couched in terms of cultural understanding. We Westerners, the argument went, should not impose our ideas of liberal democracy on people from different cultures in different parts of the world. To seek to do so was arrogant, even imperialist. But what I saw living and working in Ukraine in that tumultuous year was that the Ukrainians themselves desperately wanted to be free, to make their own decisions about their own lives, and to choose together as citizens what path their country would be followed, rather than be ruled by the diktats of a distant Politburo. I thought of that lesson from 35 years ago as I prepared for this visit to Taiwan. Just as some argued that Eastern Slavic civilization wasn't suited to freedom and democracy, some make the same argument today about some East Asian cultures. Just as Ukrainians, with their bravery and determination, fought for their freedom and democracy, the people of Taiwan, with remarkable intelligence and determination and resilience, have built a powerful, prosperous, and united democratic society here in the Indo-Pacific now for 30 years. Bravo, it is a remarkable accomplishment. And this huge accomplishment is one which strengthens the entire democratic world, not least because of the incredible semiconductor industry the people of Taiwan have created. In turbulent times like the one we're living through today, there can be a temptation to discard or at least downplay our values, to suggest that wise leaders must be prepared to sacrifice them on the altar of pragmatism. As your deputy minister said today, perhaps to take the drug of instant economic gratification. But with Ukraine, as with Taiwan, that is a false democracy. Honoring and supporting the democracy the people of Taiwan have created is in keeping with the values of the world's great liberal democracies. Honoring and supporting the democracy the people of Taiwan have created is also a practical choice, utterly aligned with our own economic and security interests. On the 1st of July, Beijing's Ethnic Unity and Progress Promotion Law came into force. Article 63 of that legislation claims the right to prosecute people and organizations outside China's borders for undermining ethnic unity. In June, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights told the Human Rights Council that this law risks deepening restrictions on freedoms of language, education, practice of religion, culture, expression, and assembly, and penalizing the peaceful exercise of minority rights in general. He called explicitly for the law to be repealed. He was absolutely right to do so. Article 63 is particularly sinister for me, given its dark kinship with Russia's malign use of linguistic, cultural, and ethnic ties to justify illegal encroachment on the sovereignty of its neighbors, including the bloody full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the summer of 2021, Putin published an essay explaining that Ukrainians and Russians were really one people. He published an essay about ethnic unity. 7 months later, he sent in the tanks. The lesson of history is clear. That is why the world's democracies must not mince their words about this legislation today. Democracies need to state plainly and in one voice that a foreign law which assigns political loyalty on the basis of ethnicity has no force on our territories and no application to our citizens, whatever their ancestry, whatever their passport, wherever they or their parents were born. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian and is subject only to Canada's laws, and I think that should apply to all of the democracies whose representatives are in this room and those who are not. That brings me to the second personal story I'd like to tell you today. In 1991, when I witnessed the people of Ukraine successfully fight for their freedom, their democracy, and their sovereignty, Francis Fukuyama had recently declared the end of history. Remember that? His contention was that the collapse of Soviet communism had demonstrated that the great historic struggle of humanity to find the best way to govern ourselves had been resolved. Democracy had been fighting communism for most of the 20th century. With the end of the USSR, that battle had concluded and democracy had won. It was a beautiful idea. And I still believe in the central conviction at the heart of it, that all people of the world, no matter what language they speak, what religion they practice, and what historical path their ancestors have traveled, want and deserve to be free, every bit as much as people like me, who had the good luck to be born in a democracy. But it did not turn out, what did not turn out to be true was that the fight between democracy and dictatorship was over. In the 21st century, dictatorship has been staging a powerful comeback. If 1991 was the end of history, today we are suffering the revenge of history. Advocates of authoritarianism started by undermining liberal democracies from within. Then, over the past 2 decades, the attacks became more overt, with Moscow's first invasion of Georgia in 2008, then of Crimea and the Donbass in 2014, and then on February 24th, 2022, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In 1991, when the people of Ukraine claimed their freedom, I was a young reporter, witnessing their struggle far from home. In 2022, when Russian President Vladimir Putin sent in his tanks to crush Ukraine's democracy, I was Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Canada. In 1991, Western leaders lectured the Ukrainians on the inadvisability of becoming a sovereign nation. In 2022, Western experts confidently predicted that Kyiv would fall within 3 weeks of the full-scale Russian invasion. That was the view of Canada's generals and of pretty much everyone else's. In the days following the full-scale invasion, the only people I spoke to who were absolutely confident that Ukraine would succeed were the Ukrainians themselves. They turned out to be right. More than 4 bloody and brutal years later, Kyiv is unconquered, and Ukraine is still free. And just as Ukraine's achievement of independence in 1991 taught me a valuable lesson, which is relevant to Taiwan today, Ukraine's current, successful, difficult struggle to remain free is relevant to the challenges you face here, half a world away. The first lesson from today's fight is the simplest and the most important. At a time when the world's dictators like to claim that their political system is more effective than self-questioning, divisive democracy, Ukraine is a powerful rebuttal. Ukraine is winning not despite being a democracy, but because it is a democracy. All liberal democracies and everyone who believes in freedom should take heart from that. As a Canadian who believes in liberal democracy, I'm inspired. The people of Taiwan who believe in liberal democracy should be inspired as well, just as all of us should be inspired by you, the people of Taiwan, and your commitment to freedom and democracy. The second lesson of Ukraine's fight right now is that appeasement does not work. In fact, it's dangerous. Putin invaded Ukraine because he was sure he would win. He thought, as our Western generals did, that Kyiv would surrender within 3 weeks. His invading army packed dress uniforms in their tanks to wear at their victory parade. That was a profound misjudgment about Ukraine and Ukrainians, and that is Putin's mistake alone. But one of the reasons he was so sure Ukraine would fail was because he believed the world's liberal democracies would give up too. And that miscalculation was as much our fault as it was the Kremlin's. When Putin invaded Georgia in 2008, we issued condemnatory statements and then sent our athletes to his Olympics in Sochi. When Putin's ally, Bashar al-Assad, crossed the White House's self-declared red line, we stood idly by. When Putin first invaded Ukraine in 2014, we continued to do business with him and his oligarchs and host him with pomp and respect at international summits. The argument, which I think will be familiar to many people here, was that by keeping a dialogue going and maintaining strong political and economic ties, liberal democracies were dissuading Putin from the rupture a full-scale invasion might entail. But the Kremlin drew a very different conclusion from our behavior. We taught Putin to believe we would not have the resolve to support Ukraine. I'm glad he was wrong. But I wish even more fervently that he had never made that miscalculation. Had he known we would stand with Ukraine, he might not have launched his full-scale invasion in the first place. Talking tough to the world's authoritarian leaders is sometimes criticized as warmongering. The opposite is the case. In a world where dictatorships are playing offense, the surest way for liberal democracies to maintain the peace is by making clear we will defend ourselves and each other. That is, of course, a lesson with great relevance for everyone here today. Speaking at this forum in 2023, Taro Aso, former Prime Minister of Japan, eloquently made that point. He said, maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait requires more than military capability alone. It also requires that democratic societies demonstrate their determination to defend peace. When an adversary clearly understands both our capabilities and our unwavering resolve, deterrence becomes credible. Those were powerful and true words. Deterrence is not provocation. Silence is not prudence. The peace of the Strait of Taiwan will be kept by the plainness with which the world's democracies say in advance that we will not accept that peace being broken. That's why being here now in Taiwan is so important. That is why solidarity with Taiwan and recognition of your flourishing democracy is so important. The third lesson of Ukraine is one that, in some ways, Kyiv has learned from Taipei. And I'm glad to say my Ukrainian cousins are proving to be apt pupils. As Benjamin Franklin counseled, God helps them that help themselves. The West, especially Europe, has supported Ukraine more than anyone imagined it would. But the reason Ukraine now has the upper hand on the battlefield is the technological inventiveness of Ukraine's own warriors and manufacturers. And success has begotten success. Ukraine today is seen as an essential ally. It's not just a charity case. Ukraine today is Europe's shield and Europe's arsenal. In this regard, Ukraine has followed Taiwan's example. Drones are to Kyiv what semiconductor chips are to Taiwan. Small democracies can win support from bigger ones by becoming indispensable. That is Taiwan's wisdom and a source of your success. Congratulations. The fourth and final lesson of Ukraine is one that I gave a speech about when I was Deputy Prime Minister ahead of the 2022 fall IMF World Bank meetings in Washington. I said then that first COVID and then the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine had shown us all the folly of becoming economically dependent on countries that do not share our values. That is what Europe bitterly discovered in 2022, and I'm looking now at my Slovak friends, when its reliance on Russian natural gas, which some had mistakenly touted as a way to bind Moscow to the rules-based international order, turned out instead to be a deep and costly vulnerability. Eduard Heger, the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, described this vividly right here at your forum in 2024. In Washington, in the fall of 2022, I proposed that the world's democracies needed to respond to this revealed Achilles heel with a new approach to trade and economic partnerships. friendshoring. Later today, this conference will be discussing an important element of friendshoring, building non-red supply chains. With your deep strength in semiconductors, microelectronics, and precision manufacturing, Taiwan can play an essential role in de-risking the supply chains of the world's democracies and ensuring that authoritarian rulers, whether in Moscow or Beijing or Tehran or Pyongyang, cannot hold us economic hostage. Taiwan's industries can make all of the world's democracies more secure, and that in turn gives the world's liberal democracies a greater stake in Taiwan's future. Let me suggest today one specific way we should extend our friendshoring coalition. Support Taiwan's application to join the CPTPP. As Trade Minister, it was my privilege to sign the initial TPP agreement in 2016. Today, I'm glad to be able to call for Taiwan to be brought into this historic pact. I've built this speech around two stories about the country that was home to some of my ancestors, a country which, I'm proud to say, is on the front lines of the fight for freedom and democracy in the world today. Slava Ukraini. I want to conclude, I want to conclude by connecting Ukraine's story with a story from my own country, Canada, and share a final thought about how democracies can win in this challenging moment. There are a lot of reasons why Ukraine is winning today, but they're built on a single foundation, and it is a foundation which democracies can uniquely build. Ukraine's fight today is the fight of an entire mobilized and committed country. Like the captains of the British little ships who answered the summons to sail in Dunkirk, millions of individual Ukrainians understand that today's war is their war, and they are each finding ways to do their own part. Ukraine remains a contentious, quarrelsome democracy, like Taiwan, and like my own Canada. But what dictators do not understand is that disputatiousness actually makes democracies stronger. Because when we are free, when we can freely debate, we can then come to a true national consensus. And democracies are strongest when, as the Ukrainians have done, we can reach a cross-party, whole-of-country consensus about the most fundamental issues. And that's why I'm glad that later today you will hear from my friend, former Canadian Trade Minister, Ed Fast. Ed laid the foundations for two trade deals, the CPTPP and CETA, our trade deal with Europe, that I was proud to conclude after they lost the elections and we won. Ed is a conservative, I'm a liberal. But I know we both believe in freedom and democracy and a world based on rules. I'm glad he is here in Taipei today as well. And I hope that in all of the world's liberal democracies, the parties of the left and the parties of the right can come to agree that in the great fight between democracy and dictatorship, which is being waged very fiercely today, we are all on the same side. I know that Taiwan is on that side. I know that everyone in this room is on that side. And that's why I'm very glad to be here in solidarity with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland, for your insightful and inspiring speech. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please now enjoy the meal. Thank you so much. Thank you.